So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are in the world today. So I'm really excited to welcome you to our now, I would say 6.5 edition of the Ethics and Philosophy of Futures event, because we got a mishappening last time, and I will tell you more about it. But this is supposed to be our 7th conversation today, and the topic will be new foresight perspectives and new philosophy. So that's really an honor for us to have today 2 amazing guests. Before I introduce them, I will just remind you of what is our philosophy for this event. What is the philosophy of these meetings we are organizing with Association of Professional Futurists? Just to let you know about the team, but I see that we have a lot of familiar today within the participants, so you start to get to know us pretty well. So I'm Sylvia Gallusser. I'm a futurist. I'm based in Silicon Valley. I studied philosophy, I studied futurism, and at some point I find some interest in exploring the interaction between both and questioning our role as futurists, our ethical role. Chris Meyer is also organizing this with me. Unfortunately, he's not here today, but we'll probably start to have these meetings in alternate. So we'll be organizing one and I will be organizing the next and so on. So you will get to see him very soon for our next meeting. Bibiana, Sherman, and Nicole have been amazingly supporting us so far. So I'm really grateful that we get this opportunity to talk to the APF audience every month about such topics. Nicole is our host today, so she's always kind, whatever the time, she's always here for us. So thank you, Nicole. She will be here during most of the meetings. So if you have any questions for her, don't hesitate to talk to her in the chat as well. And finally, I wanted to let you know about the previous sessions, because if you want to access them, they are now all available on the APF's YouTube channel. Thanks again to Nicole, who made them available. Just to scan over the topics we had so far. So we started with taking humans out of Wars of the Futures. Then we talked about biotech. I think Timothy is with us today, so he gave us a wonderful presentation on biotech, business, and ethics. Then we talked about metaphysics, morals, and machines as we explored ethics for futurists with Lisa Wissett, Elizabeth Hoppen-Schuld, and Bibiana Zauza-Bozak. And last time we had Marcus Besset and Stephanie Fisher talk to us about indigenous philosophies and how we can push the boundaries of ethics. Unfortunately, I know that a lot of you tried to connect with us last month. We had some technical issues, so we're going to reschedule our conversation that we were supposed to have with Ruth Lewis. It will be on the 26th this month. We will communicate on the event as soon as this one is over, so you will know more about the link. I think, Nicole, you are probably sending the link right now in the chat for those who want to register as of now. And finally, today, I am super excited to welcome 2 amazing persons, Raphaële Bidault-Waddington and Professor Javier Carrillo. Raphaële, you are based in Paris, in France. I will tell a few words about your job, what you're doing. So Raphaële Bidault-Waddington is the founder of LEAD Future Lab in Paris. It's an hybrid foresight research platform designing future labs for companies, cities, universities, and cultural centers in France, but also abroad. LEAD has been awarded multiple academic grants for its extended R&D lab on the future of the greater Paris metropolis at Sorbonne University. And she also worked on designing a design fiction book, which is called Paris Ars Universalis. Other collaborations include with CNRS in France, IHEST, Aalto University Helsinki, Sciences Po Paris, IFTF in Palo Alto, GDI Future Think Tank in Zurich, so very international, Center for Molecular Medicine in Stockholm, Gallery Lafayette Group, City of Montevideo, and so on. So you can find all our conferences, publications, and recent work on our website, liid.fr. And also, I think it's pretty interesting to underline it, because before creating LEAD in 2000, Raphaële worked on global commodities financial markets in Paris, London, and New York. And she holds a master's degree in knowledge economy. She's also a member of the New Club of Paris and the UNESCO Foresight and Futures Literacy Network. So today, Raphaële will introduce us to the diversity of emerging philosophies that she mobilizes to open, think, and structure new future perspectives. She also invited a special guest to join her, but I will let her introduce that special guest. So Raphaële, now the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia, for this great introduction, and thank you to all the APF team for this kind invitation. I'm really happy to be here today. So thank you, Sylvia, for showing this, like my quite official futurist bio. I will share also today some of my more artistic background and showing how I use also art and aesthetics to design future perspectives. That's something I kind of hide sometimes, but it's also, so today I will share like the most advanced R&D of Lead Future Lab, which is also going back to more artistic formats. The ongoing lab is called Toward Alien Cosmologies, prospective of an anthropological reset in the Anthropocene and AI era. So that's like an ongoing research I started about 4 years ago. And one of the chapters of that ongoing lab is an article, a chapter I wrote in a book called Knowledge for the Anthropocene that Javier Carrillo, who is here with us, edited. And it's a really visionary book showing all the epistemological challenges raised by the Anthropocene. And I think all those epistemological challenges are very close to the one we address as futurists. And so I thought, you know, also just like I will speak of the article in my presentation, and I will come back on my experience also of how I'm exploring new methods. But as a starting point, I would like to give the floor to Javier Carrillo, who is a professor, Emeritus professor of the Tech University of Monterrey. He's an expert of the knowledge economy, knowledge management, knowledge-based development. He's a founder of the World Capital Institute. We are together members of the New Club of Paris, which is an international network of knowledge economy and innovation policy experts. And I've known Javier for about 15 years. He has kindly invited me to several of his projects. So it's a really great pleasure also to have a chance to invite him and you know, share a little bit of generosity toward this amazing book that will serve as an introduction to what I will show and share with the audience afterward. So Javier, I like the fact that in your bio you emphasize also the fact that you have a passion for knowledge. That's something we share. And I think Javier is also a very interesting thinker. And I'm looking forward that we have an exchange after both our presentation. So Javier, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Raphaële. Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here with this brief contribution to set the scene for this collective reflection on the relationships between the knowledge for the Anthropocene, future studies, and alien cosmologies. Fascinating. Basically, what I would like to suggest to my colleagues here, which I'm thrilled to learn more about this APF association, is that insofar you are engaged into the challenge of forecasting and looking into the future, well, that the future has never been as elusive as it is now, simply because the inductive basis for forecasting and for projecting our experience onto what is to come has never been as broken and disrupted as it is now. Why? I see two reasons for this. First is that we have already abandoned the early paradise of the Holocene, that climate optimum, that unique state of the planet that allowed the emergence of agriculture, cities, and civilizations. There is no way back, as we have unleashed a state shift in the biosphere. The conditions under which human history has been written so far are gone. The second reason for paying special attention for the challenges of the Anthropocene with regard to any attempt to conceive of possible futures is that compromising the planetary boundaries is already generating existential risks for humans and many other species, many already extinct. So this is a fact. This is an ongoing reality. And these existential threats extend to non-living entities, such as glaciers, woods, rivers, and so on. They are dying. Some of them, they are already dead, they are gone. So our current way of inhabiting the planet is not viable. It cannot continue to be the way it is, either because it's modified or because it destroys itself. So the possibility, the very possibility of any human future depends on our collective capacity to, first of all, reset the terms of relationship with nature. Because the existing civilizational contract between mankind and nature is obviously not viable. So new terms have to be found out and established. Second, we really must learn to coexist with all of the others. This is why it's so relevant to think of alien cosmologies, to coexist with those others in a more than human world, to go beyond our anthropocentric perspectives and to really reposition ourselves in the way we co-inhabit this planet. A further challenge is to redesign a viable social metabolism. Most of the reactions to the climate crisis and the current emergency are in terms of, trying to fix it, in terms of resist it, in terms of resilience, and so forth, as if it was possible to continue otherwise business as usual and then trying to fix it. That is no longer possible. So unless a new social metabolism, unless a new balance of flows of energy and any material inputs are reinvented, it is very clear, the maths very clear indicates that there is no way out of this possibility. In consequence, we need to create a new economic culture of knowledge-based value balance, which is really a way of thinking value and what is valuable and how we create and distribute it. Fortunately, we have some indicators in some very early cultures that this has already happened, that this has been possible, but is completely alien to our current economic culture that goes totally contrary against any possibility of a viable future. We also need to transition our urban lives. The second volume of the World Capital Institute in this line of work is about city preparedness for the climate crisis. And our cities are creatures of the Holocene. Therefore, they are not prepared to cope with the upcoming challenges. We absolutely must need to be prepared and reinvent ways of living together in urban settings in terms of minimum viable systems that are adaptive and are beyond the paradigms of smart cities, resilience, and so forth. And finally, I'd like to suggest that also we need to shift our ideas of any possibility of human improvement, any sense of purpose for our species to go well beyond the concept of economic growth and to focus any idea of human improvement, possibilities of human improvement on knowledge-based development, which is the possibility to endlessly improve and ameliorate our human conditions and capabilities. And so to conclude, this is not just a technical challenge. This is mostly, and I think I am talking to the right audience, and I think this will resonate a lot with what Raphaële has to tell us. This is a challenge to imagination. The limits for the possibility of a future are the limits of human imagination. The possibility to escape the boundaries of anthropocentrism and all of the chauvinisms and embrace the other, the alien, the yet to be known. I'll leave it here, Raphaële, and thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you, Javier, for this great introduction. And maybe you want to put in the chat the reference for the book, the Knowledge for the Anthropocene book. It just came out like late November, not even 2 months ago, and I think it's a good reference for futurists also to have a look at. So maybe Javier, you can put the link to the Elgar Press website. And I'm complimenting what you say. This book comes. There is 2 books coming together. One is City Preparedness for Climate Change, and the other one, Knowledge for the Anthropocene. And Javier and I, both of us, have also a common research on cities, and I will develop that aspect also later on. But thank you very much, Javier. So I'm going to now share my screen and my slides. Here they are, full screen. Okay, here they are. So my presentation is called New Philosophies, New Foresight Perspectives. It's the latest exploration of that R&D lab that I developed at Lead Future Lab, which is called Toward Alien Cosmologies, Prospective of an Anthropological Reset. It's a project I started in 2017, and it goes step by step with conferences, publication, exhibitions. And so today I'm going to share with you some elements coming from that chapter that I wrote in Javier's book. So the article is called Designing Post-Human Futures. And I'm going also to introduce the exhibition I have at the moment in Geneva, which is also called Toward Alien Cosmologies. I'm using that term, I'm labeling every episode with that term. So today also, like I'm making the meeting is called normally Ethics and Philosophy of the Future. I'm making a little bit of a twist because I'm going to speak more of aesthetics rather than ethics. Having an artistic background, I'm more interested in philosophy that relate to the arts and aesthetics, and it's something that feeds my practice. So I'm making this little modification. And the conceptual map that you see on the right, I will speak more about it. It's one of the elements of the project. But before I start the project, maybe I give some insight about my background, because I'm a long time future explorer. I started exploring the future in the 90s when I was working on a trading floor, designing future financial tools on commodities markets, oil markets. You had to think at a 6 months horizon, 2-year horizon, 10-year horizon, and even sometimes 20-year horizon. So that's my first practice of future research has been in that frame. But at the same time, I was developing an art practice. I was an artist and a creative thinker. I was doing radio shows about contemporary art. And I was really interested in, and I was seeing that there was really a dual dynamic between the way the economic world was transforming and the way the artistic and cultural world were transforming. I could see there was some parallel, the way markets were having market cycles. just like also in the cultural domain, there were cultural trends and movements that were shaping. So I developed a practice of a futurist, really based on that practice, by like mixing practical experiences in different fields, and also having always a thinking and having a taste for theory and concept. And my sensibility to philosophy comes more from my artistic sensibility, with an interest in aesthetics and speculative theories and author philosophies. So you will see my references are more coming from that spectrum of philosophy. You can take a screenshot. I'm not going to speak about all the items that are on my slide. It's a little bit rich, but I think some of you can be interested by, mirroring those two spheres of transformation, the economic sphere and the cultural spheres. What I want to emphasize with that is that on the right side, you have two artworks that I exhibited in 2001 and in 2003. The one on the top is called Poetico-Speculative Bubble, and it was in 2001, which is a year where the NASDAQ speculative bubble of the internet went down. And it was really a marker. It was a moment where you could feel the aesthetic dimension of the financial sphere, how it was full of promises and of future hopes that would not necessarily translate into reality. So it would collapse, but at the same time, 20 years later, we see what is this reality, how it developed. So I'm still showing that image as, the way we are how the world is full of future hopes and promises, and they are very distributed in the society. Also with that artwork, I'm showing the way I'm creating knowledge with images in the installation. It's about 800 images that are spread out around the space. And the other installation in the bottom is called Goodwill. And it's a map showing how an artistic practice can be also a way of producing knowledge, and how there could be some bridges between the way you produce knowledge in the academia, in the economic sphere, and in the artistic sphere. So it's just this to put the ground of how I've been developing a practice, and LEAD Future Lab was really based on that core fundamentals of practice with images and the junction between art and knowledge. LEAD, so I'm shifting to my the conceptual foundation of LEAD was really that notion of idea engineering. So LEAD means Laboratoire d'Ingénierie d'Idées, Idea Engineering Laboratory. Now I'm saying LEAD Future Lab because I renamed it about 5 years ago. But I really want to mark this notion of knowledge design, thinking with images, thinking of the forms of knowledge as part of the practice. So just like to give you, to make the link between the two installations I showed you, this is the installation I'm showing in Geneva, which is called Toward Alien Cosmologies, and it's a freestanding architecture. So you see on the left, it's like a big block, it's open and it's freestanding, and inside it's a full panorama of information. I'm just giving you this, the image, and I will come back in how I've been designing that installation as a Foresight heuristic device. Now, this installation is also the result of 20 years of experiment at LEAD Future Lab. So I'm going to try to stay very compact. So LEAD Future Lab, since I started it 20 years ago, the point was to experiment how to bring an artistic way of thinking outside the art world, working with companies, working with cities, working with universities. And around 2010, I really took a shift toward the knowledge sphere by working more with university, by winning academic grants. But I've always kept that notion of knowledge design and a reflection on how you could design art-based methodologies. So among the key experiences that I want that are informing that lab on alien cosmologies I would like to speak of an ongoing collaboration. Every year I work with the PECLER's Future Trend Agency in Paris, which is part of the WPP group. And I do with them future trend research based on weak signals on 360 degrees topics. So I'm really, like, my practice is very much based on trends and weak signals, mapping trends, and having always a very ecosystemic perspective, not by sector, but really having this societal and global perspective. So studies are always done at a global at a global scale. So it's really my sensibility is very much informed by that practice. So I've done plenty of collaboration with knowledge places, cities, companies. A little collaboration with Aalto University allowed me to have an experience with the Institute for the Future. So I still had some influence from classic Foresight practices. And also I did almost 10 years project on the future of the Greater Paris at the Sorbonne University in an art and design research department. And that project allowed me to design and experiment a whole scope of a future research method, always using artistic formats such as the conceptual diagram that you see in the bottom, or also on the right side, like designing futurescaping future camps and futurescaping labs with their students. So my practice has been very much on working with weak signal, mapping trends, and designing methodologies. So after all those 20 years, and also with the Anthropocene era, the post-truth era, the artificial intelligence era, it feels we are on the frontier of a new way of thinking, because we can't be thinking the way we're thinking, as Javier mentioned very well. And so the lab Toward Alien Cosmologies came from that desire to really look for new methodologies to address that agenda. And so now I'm going to enter that laboratory. I think you can take a screenshot and read more the details if you want. But the alien cosmologies, it started, so the first, I originally coined the term in a collaboration with PECLER's on a reflection on what was the future with AI. And it was clear that with AI, it's not just the future of AI, it's the future with AI. And AI actually impacts every domain of the society. And also there was this limit that to train AIs, you need to install inside AI a sense of creating a world. AIs need to be informed, to have a sense of a world they have. And so it's really the alien cosmologies comes from that reflection on how to think new vision of the world with AI having an influence on every facet of the world, and how also we needed to really challenge ourselves to really design new worlds also in the place of artificial intelligence. And so from that initial reflection, it was clear that that reflection on world building was common to the reflection necessary to address the Anthropocene. And it was actually already addressed by quite a few people in the Foresight community. And I can show example of Leah's ideas with her 7 foundation model. On the bottom right, you have also Alex McDowell, Future Mandala. So we see some people who are trying to explore new way of addressing the future at that scale, when all our fundaments are in question, when even science is at the limit of itself, when our terrestrial existence is in doubt. And so Toward Alien Cosmologies is about how to design new worlds, new cosmologies. The cosmology, the way I use it is really come more from anthropology, the way anthropologists use that notion to really speak of the value system or the belief system that societies design to give meaning to life and existence. So it's something between religions and knowledge, and the actual universe. I use it not as astrophysicians use it, but more as anthropological, the anthropological meaning. And so Toward Alien Cosmologies is this challenge of how to think at that frontier. So on the front of Foresight, we have some insight. And what I want to, one thinker who have been really contributing to my research is Francesca Ferrando. She's a post-humanist philosopher. She wrote that, she edited that book, Philosophical Posthumanism, which came out recently, maybe last year, I'm not sure which year anymore. And but in the essay I wrote in Javier's book, I'm really referring to that specific essay she wrote, which is called Towards a Posthumanist Methodology, where she shows how posthumanism can be a way of having plural epistemology, and how it is a way of being post-anthropocentric and being post-humanist. Humanism was really placed mankind at the center of its worldview. Posthumanism is really emancipating from that intellectual frame. In her vision, posthumanism is also questioning essentialism and the use, and being clear with the use of transcendence and cosmologies. It's not denying transcendence, it's being aware of how it is used, how it is instrumentalized eventually. Posthumanism, in her perspective, is also ecofeminist friendly. It's also, it leaves space to the non-human ontologies, whether machines, bots, and also an alternative species. And it is also open to multiverse realities. What is interesting in her essay is that also she really tried to set a methodology that is quite open. It doesn't have a clear purpose or result. It's more a methodology that is meant to support the thinking. So it's not like we want to have a result with the methodology. We want more to design a cognitive system. And so that's something that I'm mobilizing in the lab Toward Alien Cosmologies. Another interesting facet of her theory is also the way that the elements manipulated in the methodology are versatile and fluid. And there is also a way of indulging with semiotics and linguistic, so that it's not, so that there is an aesthetic experience of the thinking, which I find really interesting. So there is a kind of like indulgence and pleasure to think in the methodology. So with that slide, I want to, I think it's interesting to have a like really the base of the alien cosmology is really to go in that direction between Foresight and posthumanist philosophies. I think there is a whole discussion on posthumanism. I'm not going to go further on that, because now I would like to go clearer in the how I'm learning from that to design a methodology. And from that, because the risk also with this very fluid canvas is that we can fall into radical informality, that Catherine Malabou, another philosopher who I find interesting, that speak about that the risk today to fall into informality, which is like everything is equivalent to everything. And so to design like structured reasoning, we still need to have some kind of cognitive architecture. And so that's where I'm bringing again this diagrammatic vocabulary, which I find really interesting. And we see with Leila Zaidi or Alex McDowell, we have these mandala and round and spheric thinking to try to grasp the whole world in a way. In alien cosmologies, I think it's more interesting to search for systemic perspectives that are open and remain unclosed, not necessarily as taking the shape of a sphere, but more taking the shape of a polygon, an open polygon, so that you have a sense of the whole, but there can be multiple facets. And in that research, I'm interested in referencing to Raymond Lull, the Ars Magna, and Leibniz Ars Combinatoria, which were diagrams that were at that time, in early modernist time, trying to grasp the whole, having this really possibility to rationalize the world in this really synthetic perspective. And I think we should emancipate from that canvas to go toward polygonal cognitive solution. And so the installation I showed earlier and the diagram you see on the page also are more playing with that notion of polygonal research so that you can address multifaceted and multiscalar research, addressing a problem from different perspectives and from at different scales. So this is what the way I'm designing also that research, by mapping different entries. In that reflection, I'm referring also to François Laruelle. François Laruelle is a French philosopher who is a quite crazy thinker. He's actually more followed in the US than in France. He's developing what he called a non-standard philosophy. I will give you in the chat later on the link to their publication. He's developing a non-standard philosophy. He's trying to explode the Western canvas of the history of philosophy. And in his reflection, he's introducing a lot of reflection coming from art, and he's suggesting also to think as an artistic installation. And so the Alien Cosmologies installation is trying to think, to really specialize knowledge and to think as an art installation. So François Laruelle is a thinker that I find really interesting. Giorgio Agamben also has this notion of apparatus, but I think it's an interesting concept, but it has an instrumental dimension. And I think it's more relevant to really stay on a more like open canvas rather than instrumentalized system. So with Alien Cosmologies, this is like the more critical and cognitive architecture that I'm trying to look for to design the methods. So this is part also on a reflection that I have for about 20 years on the shapes of knowledge and how to specialize knowledge and how space can be a resource to produce clarity. Continuing on that specialization and the diagrammatic language, now I'm kind of enter in the combination of the installation and the diagram. So you see in the bottom right, it's a diagram that I showed at the beginning of my presentation. And I think keeping a focus on scales is actually very efficient. When you do workshops with people and you want to engage with a community of people, to engage in a collective exploration, the scale is a very easy aspect to grasp. Everybody can understand very quickly what is a zoom out process. So I stick to that notion of a zoom out by having different spheres of thinking that can be addressed at different and as a way to design future world. And those five scales are as on my slide. So the first scale is called Mysterious Machines and New Ontologies. This scale has proved to be like very philosophical also. Then there's the scale 2, 3, and 4, lifestyle design with a focus on use, is very close to the way you design futures through design, which is always very use-centric. The third and the fourth is closer to what you normally do in Foresight, with a look on systems, territorial systems, and global systems. So those spheres 2, 3, and 4 are scales that are quite, more classic in a Foresight exercise. And the fifth scales, which I call bigger pictures, is where I put those new cosmologies, new belief system, new meta-narrative. And designing future worlds, future cosmologies needs to the methodology consists in including those 5 dimensions. There is no hierarchy between them. They're just a ladder with different scale, which keeps with the scaling allows to have a very, very quickly a sense of, okay, So to design future vision, I can work on all those scales, or I can start from one scale and then raise questions on the next ones. So the diagrams allow to have a synthetic perspective, and the installation becomes the heuristic device to highlight the trends that are making each of the sphere evolve. And at the same time, you can mobilize knowledge for each of these spheres. So this is like on the 4 diagrams on this slide is more the visual graphic research, like showing how you can also introduce different perspectives in the diagram. It can come from the side, it can come from the center of one of the spheres, it can come from behind. On the last, I don't know if you saw the legend of the first images. I said the future is watching you, saying that in the last one, maybe it's also we can have a perspective from the future looking at us now, having a backward perspective. And so the polygonal perspective with the sphere is about creating a cognitive architecture with all those different perspectives. Then we come back to the installation. So now we understand it better. So with the installation, we have that open structure. So it's not a closed circle. It's like freestanding walls, and on each of the walls, there is feeds of information that can be maps. There is rolls of paper, and it can be collaborative. You can add knowledge as much as you want. The walls can be moved in the space, and you can stage a full research group inside the installation, and it becomes a way of designing future cosmologies by considering systematically each of those 5 dimensions. So I'm coming back to the 5 dimensions. So the first one is really the alien factor, with that notion of new being, new ontologies. Let me see. Yeah, okay. So so the first and the last are really the spheres where there is more philosophical questions. So I'm going to go briefly. Let me check the time. Yeah, I have 5 more minutes. So you have the 5 scales. When you are in the center of the installation, you can have a grasp on each of those scales without any hierarchy. And also the installation is a kind of simulation of a possible predictive algorithm that would predict our future world by detecting weak signal in each of those information feeds. So it's also playing with algorithmic cognitive structures and specializing it in an art installation. But just to zoom on the first and the last spheres to share with you the ideas. On the first one, the mysterious machine, new ontologies, and the alien factor, I want to, it's important to be aware that like we are in a world, as Javier said, where we have to consider other species, endangered species, extinct species, non-human species. So that's one facet. We also have to consider new species and life forms, whether it's bio-designed species, whether AIs, robots, xenobots. You have the mood board on the bottom left. The top right image, it's a xenobot, which is a robot made with living organic cells. So it's what you call a xenobot. And also new species are part of those alien cosmologies. And also it's like the frontier of the human. The border of the human are today very blurry. When we see how the gender fluidity, that separation that used to be so essential to the understanding of mankind, now we see the separation is not so clear. We have augmented mind and body. We have blurry identities. So in that first sphere of reflection, we have like a really ontological question. In that sphere, I want to refer to Catherine Malabou, who is really a really interesting philosopher. And she's like, I'm referring to her book, Morphing Intelligence, From IQ Measurement to Artificial Brains, where she shows even how consciousness is not so clear. Like she really shows how mixing, like she's a philosopher who has been going very close to what neuroscientists are developing. And she shows how our mind is actually full of automatism, and clear conscious decisions we make are actually taken before our awareness by our minds. So even what we call consciousness is not so clear. So with that first sphere, I think it's like in those alien cosmologies is about really taking full awareness of all those potential futures around those ontological ambiguities. So I'm not going into the second, third, and fourth because it would take too long, and I think the audience might be quite familiar with the critical issues raised in those topics. And I'm shifting already to the last bigger picture sphere, which is like the two are. I would say that it's two spheres that are kind of like really typical of a post-human philosophy. On those bigger pictures, I'm interested in other forms of thinking, like that are on the verge of our rationality, because mankind, like the Western one, have been trying to rationalize the world, but we see that we are at the limit of that humanist rationalization, which would include fear of the future in our thinking. And for instance, I'm interested in Reza Negarestani, who is a philosopher he's from Iranian background, but he's based in the US. In his book, Intelligence and Spirit, he's trying to think what is the metaphysics and the world of that supposed to be AGI. He's part of the school of thinking that you call theory fiction, which is like, also just like François Laruelle, kind of exploding the discipline of philosophy. So it's really also seeing like, all our disciplines are kind of very profoundly challenged, whether foresight, knowledge, philosophy, art is experiencing the same kind of limit. And with that last sphere, we are on that same agenda of looking for new rationalism, new way of thinking. So I'm also referring to Quentin Messaillou, who is a philosopher from the speculative realism school, and his book, Science Fiction and Extra Science Fiction, where he's putting the hypothesis of what could be how to design a world where science is not possible. What science fiction is fiction in which there is science, but what is a fiction of a world where science do not work? I think that those philosophies are very stimulating to think those new possible cosmologies and future world. And also in that last, so that I'm looping and going back to my introduction, it's also like showing how the future as an instrument is also part of that reflection, and the place of the future and the fear of the future is really one element. Today, a lot of people are trying to be, there is a fear of the future, or there is an utopia and promises of the future, and how we can get an awareness of how the future is being an instrument. And for me, it's quite similar to the way Heidegger introduced the fear of human finitude in the 30s. As a major shift in the history of philosophy. I think the fear of the future is a shift also in our way of thinking and our future cosmologies. So I'm going to stop here, and I'll be happy to answer to your questions. And if you are interested in hosting or co-designing a future an episode of the Toward Alien Cosmologies, I'm open to proposition. Like part of the lab has been also doing workshops with design students, and there is quite a few conferences also I've done. So it's an ongoing future lab. Are we? Yes. Okay. So I think we are just on. I said 30 minutes. I'm just 30 minutes. So I'm going to stop here, and we can enter the conversation. I hope this was clear, and I'm looking forward to engage with you.
Thank you, Raphaële. That was amazing, and I will just share my opinion here. But I think how you intricated foresight, philosophical schools, but also economics and arts was actually very innovative in the way we've been presenting so far. So I think it was really interesting to see things presented in a different way. I personally truly enjoyed the visual mapping you've been doing. I think it really brought a lot of clarity as to many concepts. Maybe one thing before anybody asks questions, but in the meantime, please feel free to ask your questions in the chat or to raise your hands if you have any questions. One question to start maybe from me, Raphaële. So you define a lot of concepts, and I would say you illustrate them maybe more than you define them. So I'm probably going to ask you maybe to clarify them to make sure we are all on the same page on this. So I've got two I would like maybe you to spend some time on. The first one is about alien cosmology. And I know you've been illustrating it, but maybe if you could give us the definition or try to explicit exactly what are the other concepts that it covers. And the second one, we've been discussing it last time, but once again, I think it's really at the core of what you've been discussing. You talk about post-anthropomorphism, post-anthropocentrism, post-humanism. And you define it as not anti-humanism, but post-humanism. And I know we've been discussing it last time already, but if we could spend some time on it, what we mean really with post-humanism, I would really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sylvia, for these two questions. So for the first question about alien cosmologies, well, the concept of alien cosmology came from that research on the future of AI with AI. And as first, it was the AI that was this alien factor that, and then it felt like, okay, around that concept of the alien factor, in fact, in that alien, it's much more than the AI. It's the unknown, it's other species, the species that we are going to that mankind is going to design. It's maybe other forms of life. So the alien is the unknown. It's a question mark factor. So it's like really having the uncertainty factor and the unknown at the center of the thinking. So it's like really that, and it comes also sorry, I lost you. Yeah, excuse me. Just 1 second. So the alien is the other life forms. It's robotics entities, electronic personas, artificial intelligence, outer space. We see like the James Webb telescope has been launched recently to be able to get a chance to go to have a look at the possibility of other life forms on other planets. So it could come from there also, but the alien is really acknowledging that there is other life forms that we have to make a society with, and that even mankind, we're not so sure what it is to be a human. So even mankind is alien to itself. So it's more like really accepting this uncertainty, this blurriness around ontologies. So that's the alien. And cosmologies, as I said, cosmologies is a concept that is quite blurry as well. Also, it's cosmologies comes from is used in religion, but it's used in astrophysics, it's used in anthropology. As I said, I'm more using the term in an anthropological way. And also because it has been so much Westerners who have been using that term to kind of like modelize or think the way of thinking of other cultures. We were looking at the cosmologies of Amerindian societies or African societies as a kind of, or we think we have an understanding of what is their culture, and we put that term of cosmology. So I'm kind of reversing it and putting it above our head as a kind of like reverse process of using that term on us, and being under that roof also of those cosmologies. And so I'm combining those two terms so that we clear that designing those future cosmologies, so that's why the lab is toward alien cosmologies, because it's a horizon, it's in the future. It's not today, it's toward, so those alien cosmologies are those future worlds toward which we try to look, or like that we can imagine. So it's more like how to design those future worlds by a methodology that is encompassing all those dimensions with that canvas, which is called Toward Alien Cosmologies. So it's not, and I don't think it needs to be more clearly defined. I think at some point it's interesting to leave a little bit of a fluidity around terms so that it could become something else in the evolution of the lab. Just like with the diagram, the first version had only 4 spheres, and at some point I added a 5th one. And there is, like, it's really in progress. And when I was referring to, so I'm answering to the second question now, going back to posthumanism. And so what I said, like posthumanism, I'm not a thinker of posthumanism. It's like really, I'm referring to Francesca Ferrando, who I've been following. She's a really interesting thinker because she's also developing a posthumanist research community, having like really a very cross-cultural discussion with people in India, in Africa, in Latin America, in Europe, in the US. So it's really a very, very diverse knowledge sphere. And what I think is interesting from that perspective is that it's more a methodology to think. It's not a fixed theory. So there is a diversity and a pluralist pluralist perspective inside that frame. And she's the one saying that posthumanism is not anti-humanism, because it could be, there is anti-humanism also nowadays of people who are, kind of refusing and kind of denying the heritage of humanism. She's more like building on and taking the Anthropocene as a challenge to go one step further of like expanding the scope of humanism to non-human species. And so like now I'm more repeating what she's conceptualizing and developing. And I really encourage, I can share with you her essay Toward a Posthumanist Methodology is very easy to find online. And so I really encourage you to read her essay, and I've decided to really appropriate her recommendation in terms of methodology. I think it's really interesting, that notion of fluid methodology.
Thank you, Raphaële. I think that really helped us go into the details of what you cover. And I will try to now bring some questions from the audience, because I see around 10 of them, and I'll try to ask them in the order that they appeared to me. And I think the first one was Jochen Büchel. I don't know if I say it right. I hope I do. You had a question, you raised your hand, so please.
Yeah, thanks so much. What a great event. And I'm so happy to listen to Raphaële again. Well, in my life, I've never heard something better, inspiring with her economical background. So I try to focus. It's also interesting. And I try to focus on what interests me most. That's religion. I'm so happy that she brought in some Ramonui, because I saw the 3 Ramonui exhibitions, Barcelona, Karlsruhe, Lausanne, who were amazing. And they are just a start. We have to work on this. That's my question should be concerning these patterns on religion. Like, I don't know if you have seen Dune by Villeneuve. I think that was very inspiring type of science fiction film. Do you have already ideas how to bring in? I think mysticism is not really aware in medicine. I'm now meeting people who try to do art therapy research. Do you see first steps how to make an intelligent use of religion? Because I think just Buddhism is not enough. I think we also should try to look at Christianism, like Kirche from the Jesuits. Do you have ideas how to introduce a religion in an intelligent way?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ron, for this question. Yeah, I mean, religion, for me, it's not necessarily it's one of the aspects of those alien cosmologies, because in those alien cosmologies, okay, we need to rebuild a relation to the invisible and the unknown. And that is, like, historically, religion were always the one providing kind of answers and like some kind of like cognitive models in a way to give a purpose and to give a sense of order of the world. But it's not, there is not only religion who has done that. That's why I'm speaking also of those meta-narrative, because in fact, every human being is doing a kind of like bricolage, to take an anthropological term also, of associating different theories and intuition and belief. And that's why science is not in that sphere. It's more in the previous one, which is like rationalizing. But religion has a history of answering those questions. And so that's why I'm referring to them in that fifth sphere. But it's important that it's one part, but not the whole. It's not about, that sphere is not only about religion. It's more, I would say that it's more like the relation to the invisible. That
very good.
That is a key aspect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for answering, Raphaële, and thank you for the great question. Second question we got was from Jonathan Brown in the chat. Where does Heidegger talk about ethics in a post-humanist whole? I don't know, Jonathan, if you want to express more than that, feel free to ask your questions also loud. Otherwise, Raphaële, if you have some insight on this, we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, I referred to Heidegger. Not on Heidegger is from another generation. He didn't say anything about posthumanism, but I was more referring on the fact, because, and I'm actually not an expert at all on Heidegger, but part of the lab, I had a chance to make a conference at the Museum of Souche in Switzerland, and they had a focus on Heidegger, and they were like, yeah, and one of the and it was a conference on the future of AI, and there was a parallel between how AI is creating new forms of fears that are part of, that becomes a question for us to think of, which are similar to the way Heidegger emphasized the fear of human finitude. As something that should inform philosophy. So I was showing that turn and that notion of fear as marking a turn in the history of philosophy, saying there was one turn a century ago, 80 years ago, and another one nowadays with that fear of AI and transhumanism.
Thank you, Raphaële. And I see that, Timothy, you've been raising your hand for a while and you had some comments in the chat. So please feel free to ask your questions to Raphaële and Javier.
Thank you. It's my virtual hand. I'm not tired at all from raising it. It's a great presentation. You covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time, and I salute you for making it coherent. It's always a challenge. And so I'm going to keep this to really three elements regarding human biases. And one of them is the linear bias, that the artificial environments are almost entirely, I'm speaking very broadly, of course, but we're very comfortable with linear environments. We create linear environments all around us. Our straight walls, our flat floors, generally flat ceilings. Just look around you. If you're in an artificial environment, you're seeing a lot of lines. Whereas if you're out in nature, they're almost non-existent. It's a curvilinear and fractal world out there. And I would like to refer you to the background. If you go to Sylvia's screen, you might see a great combination where we have both the linear and the natural world arrayed behind her. And it's an interesting combination. It synthesizes those two worlds in a very pleasing way. But I do want to point out that by and large, we're not comfortable in a fractal and linear world. Maybe we like to be out in nature, but we like to be on the path. It's another thing entirely when you're being scratched and poked by the branches themselves. So I just wanted to point that out. Second element is concerning scale. We see things in human scale, quite naturally so. And so we don't pay attention to the invisible world, which makes up most of our life forms. and are scared by things like viruses and bacteria and such, even though they often sustain us. So that's another element that I think we need to grow an awareness of in terms of this larger idea of both posthumanism, environmentalism, all of these elements that are embedded within the presentation. The third bias is what I would call the biological, is that we have an inherent bias towards the warm and fuzzy and a revulsion towards the cold and slimy, regardless of the fact that if the pandas were to disappear off the face of the earth, indeed it would be tragic. But if the earthworms were to go, then we're talking big, big trouble. And yet we don't see a lot of funding for the earthworm. So I just wanted to point those out, that we have these biases that are embedded within us as a species. And as we can grow our consciousness to recognize those biases, I think we're going to enter into a richer philosophy that is being presented here now. I'll just leave it at that and invite further comment.
Yeah, I'll be happy to answer. And Javier, if you want to answer also, you're very welcome. But in terms of bias, so yeah, I think human bias are unavoidable. We are human. We think as human, but what is important is that we analyze our own bias in the map. So that's why, like when I showed my slides of the diagrams and having a polygonal shape and having a semioscape perspective, it's also by putting ourselves as observers, as thinkers in the map, so that we're not detached. It's not possible to have like fully detached objectivity. So like the circle, the circle of a full the overview, the circle overview is the possibility to have an objective perspective. And with the alien cosmologies, it's more about placing our own subjectivity or supposed to be objectivity inside the landscape as possible angles in that panorama. And to answer to the fluid versus linear, it's not because it's linear that it's not possible to have multiplicity. We can have plenty of linear position and possible angles. So it's easy for the mind to grasp architectures. We can take a position, and when we take another position, we can take different perspective. And having linear aspect is comfortable for the mind. So I don't think why we should forget about that. But at some point we can really make a statement of, okay, I'm looking from that perspective, or I'm looking from that discipline vocabulary, but if you have multiple, then like what was it? I think it's Descartes who was speaking of that myriagone. From like plenty of angles, you end up having a circle. So it's not necessarily as fully separate. And you can have an architecture and inside some fluidity. So in the polygonal structure, you have different facets so that you have a sense of clarity. You have different position, different perspective. You can have a sense of it. It doesn't mean that there is no interaction and movement in between. So I think it's totally possible to combine both. And mind kind of has a tendency to, to make decisions and to find trust. We need to have a sense of rationality. It's not forbidden to be rational at some point. It's more like how much complexity can we put in our rationality. And so this a combination of linear rationality versus movement and fluidity works hand in hand. So I don't think there is any separation on that. And same thing with the cold and the warm and the cold. And I think it's more like having a life system doesn't mean that we are, choosing between one side and the other. It's more like having a more sophisticated cognitive architecture. I'm not sure if I answered properly your question. But I don't think the opposition you make are real opposition. I think they're compatible.
Well, I'm going to comment very quickly, and I've said as much within the chat, and that is, it's still a bias, and we need to recognize it. It's a bias. It's a bias. Linearity is a bias. It's an artificial construct. It is unnatural. It is unnatural. The natural world is fractal. The natural world is far more curvy and fractal than linear. This is an artificial construct, and we need to recognize that moving forward. That's my point.
I fully agree with you. It's a purely it's man-produced, and
It's an excellent comment, and I'm glad we talked about this bias, and always with these questions like, first step is to be aware of them. Second step is how do we deal with them, and how do we change so that we have less of this bias? How can we really construct that kind of more curvy and more natural conception? I see that Leif Edvinsson has been making a lot of comments and asking questions, and also bringing praise to you, Raphaële. Really glad to see such good comments on your presentation.
Yeah, can you save the comment, because I don't have time to read them all, and I'm very happy Leif is here. Leif is one of the founders of the New Club of Paris, which I mentioned. Javier and I are both members of the New Club of Paris, and that network was Leif Edvinsson was one of the three founder, and Leif, what is your question? Your microphone is closed.
Go ahead, Leif. If you can. Maybe I can unmute you.
Warm salutations to both of you. Great presentation, most stimulating. And the last comment about straight line in nature also refers to Hundertwasser, who said that there is no straight line in nature. And consequently, he designed blocks in Vienna based on that insight. But my question and a key remark is related to the next step for you, and that is, how could you make a polygonic design based on the mandala thinking? And as you know, mandala is the stem cell of stem cells. So when you have a mandala that is about 3 days old, you don't know if it's going to be a computer or a human being.
Honestly, I'm not so into the mandala thinking, because I think a mandala is closed. It's a closed circle. And as I said in my examples, I think we need to find like our cognitive architecture that are open. There is always a breach. There is a breach to a factor we don't know. And that's why I think the polygon is interesting, because a polygon can be 2 sides, but it can be 10,000 sides. It's not one, it's not a specific figure. It's a multiple, it's a quite interesting concept because it's not so clearly defined. And a polygon can be almost a circle eventually. But I think the open polygon model is more interesting as creating a cognitive architecture that can include many different bias and angles, like bias are angles, but remaining open so that there is always fair space for an extra dimension, an extra side. And I think this is what is that is like this alien factor, is that breach that we should always keep in the system, so that, and that's the point with artificial intelligence, they are closed system. At some point, there is, and
but
so
Raphaële, and this is the point, that your polygonic approach is the mandala. So if you look into molecular medicine and the cell dimensions, the mandala is the stem cell of stem cells, which means that you don't know whether it's going to be a computer or a human being. And it's open-ended, polygonic.
Yeah.
And you pointed toward it. So congratulations, brilliant.
Thank you, Leif. Very nice. I'm honored to have your comments. So, is there any other?
Just want to mention that I was just reading about Jung. I don't know if I can put it here. I've got a problem of background. Okay. Yeah. I don't know if you see it. That's a mandala that Jung actually produced. A lot of his thinking was based on mandala. He was always trying to integrate different kind of philosophies and approaches in his thinking. And for me, it really correlates with what we've been hearing from you today, Raphaële. I don't know if any of you is familiar with that. That's quite interesting.
Very interesting.
And the mandala figure, I mean, for me, it's also in the history of the mandala is also that quest for something as a beautiful whole. And with my background in art and aesthetics, also we know that there is something beautiful about imperfection and broken shapes. And so the ideal shape is related to idealism and the idea of a universal beauty, where I think now we are in this pluralistic and disruptive models. So I think really the mandala shape is, for me, too much associated with the aesthetic and the philosophy of that universal unicity and probably ethics. I mean, I'm not speaking so much about ethics because I'm more interested in aesthetics and the combination between forms and meaning and forms and content. But I think like the mandala is not, I personally don't use, I prefer multiple spheres, floating spheres, open cloud spheres, open polygon, rather than mandala features.
Well, we're talking about aesthetics. I would also like us to talk about ethics. And I see in the chat one question related more to ethics, actually, from Jonathan Brown. And then I will give you a chance to talk also, Paola, you're next. Sorry to have you wait for this. But Jonathan was asking, what would freedom for non-human species look like in a democratic world? Would you like to give us some insight on this, Javier or Raphaële?
Javier, go for this one.
I got the easy one. I'll take the opportunity to connect with the ongoing dialogue because I think that one of the main challenges for thinking futures for the Anthropocene comes precisely in overcoming these discontinuities that we have inherited from modernism between linearity and non-linearity, as expressed in major categories like natural versus artificial, like tangible versus intangible, and so forth. I think very much that what we need is to rescue that kind of epistemology and cosmologies that are like inherent to what we used to call primitive peoples and civilizations, where the continuum, the sense of continuum was really the overwhelming experience and reality. So coming back to this question, I think that there is the discussion in not just regarding ethics, but also the actual implementation of artificial intelligence is somehow trapped with this, with keeping this distinction between the artificial and the natural. We should not forget that artificial intelligence is not just the digital domain that now we associate to it, that artificial intelligence is embedded in everything that is cultural, in architecture, in urban design, in the economy, is the embedded algorithms that are there that leading us to behave in a certain way. So what would, and also with posthumanism that is able to coexist with cyber organisms that are, we are already, our mobile phones are extensions of our memory and our intelligence. So we are ourselves, whether we want it or not, we are already living cyborgs. And so basically my recollection here is try and overcome all these dichotomies and being able to establish continua that enable us to bridge epistemologies, perspectives, experiences, and cultures in a way that we are able to jump to a bigger level and being able to integrate human experiences in the way that the world is demanding us. You know, everything is changing dramatically. We take for granted that we will have a problem with water, with food, and so forth for the coming years. But water is not going to be water. Water will be some sort of contaminated chemical that we have to deal with. Food production as well is not, the soil is basically disappearing. We are doing away with what has naturally been the fertile ground, and so forth. Everything, the rivers, the glaciers, the Antarctica, the seas, the oceans, living species, everything is transforming itself, and we really need to be prepared to deal with futures that are anything like has been experienced so far by our species.
Thank you, Javier. I'm commenting on you because I fully agree with you, and I think it's really important to not separate human from the non-humans, and reciprocally, and that this continuity in that sphere of the alien and the new ontologies. I'm really also speaking on that that issue of continuity, and for me, also the separation between natural and artificial is not so relevant anymore because it's fully entangled. And also, if we were in the mind of stones before life arrived, we could imagine the stones in the head of the day some life forms arrived, and they would have said, oh, what are those crazy machines that are going to invade our stone age and stone world? So the artificial, like you know, the other, if we were you know, for our anything new seems artificial, but in fact it's a continuity of developments. And I think part of this alien cosmologies is also being able to address what could be possible world where mankind have failed to recuperate the situation. And when Javier speaks about what is a world with toxic water, I mean, as far as now, there is clearly no signs of like not going in the right direction. Things are getting better, but we could also, and some people are saying at the end of the world, but there will not be any end of the world. There will be some catastrophe, and behind the catastrophe, there is still a world we will have to think of. So it's also like, what could be those future worlds that we could have to envision with all those factors which can be mastered or not mastered, but in all cases, we need to design and to imagine themselves, to imagine those possible worlds. And what are those worlds where, you know, where we live in super toxic environment? I mean, we have no clue. So science fiction is really interesting for that, to help us make thought experiences, thought experiment. Like science fiction can be also, the problem with science fiction is that it's, someone's mentioned Dune. Science fiction have a tendency to give to be very spectacular. So it's dangerous because it brings us, it manipulates our emotional reaction in a certain direction or another by the aesthetics it gives to future possibilities. So science fiction is a way of designing future world, but it can be very quickly closed world, like it's in the frame of a film or of a book. And also it can create a kind of like an emotional reaction that prevents us from fully grasping what are the possibilities. So an occasion to speak a bit of science fiction.
Amazing comments, and I could react on all of them, but I want to give a voice also to Paula and Cecily, because I see a lot of interaction in the chat from both of you, and I would really like to give you an opportunity to express. Paula, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Sylvia. Raphaële, that was exceedingly enlightening and thought-provoking installation and discussion with regard to your concepts of alien cosmologies. Having lived in South America for a good number of years, I became quite connected with, and I took quite a bit of time to learn about Andean cosmologies and their notion and relationship of not just their natural world, whether it's within the confines of a forest or within their homes. So whether it's linear or more fractalized, as was already mentioned. Really interesting thoughts with regard to that. But also so not just within the 3 dimensions of their physical world or planet, but also in the 4th dimension of time, and how their sense of continuity of time space was all encompassed in one. So, somewhat like what you would think of, not so much of a polygon, but like a tesseract. So my question to you is, how do you contemplate cosmologies with that 4th time dimension included, not just in the aesthetic representation of it, but also in terms of futures where we are contemplating the continuity of ourselves as past, present, future generations, plural possibilities. So I'm curious about your take, and whether you take it from the Weltanschauung school of thought, or if you're looking at it from an Amerindian or Southern global South perspective. There are these time constraints that are built into. I wouldn't even say constraints. There are more possibilities. Like, for example, the Chacana model of the Andean worldview, or cosmovision, where the hole in the center of that Southern Cross image, it allows for that fluidity and continuity of realities. So sorry, perhaps I'm not being very clear, but
no, I get you, and you're perfectly right. And I think when I concluded with this the fact that we should integrate in this panoramic perspective, this panoramic design, the relation to the future and the power of the future on us, it's really this the time factor in all that, because as you say, there is plenty of philosophies of time, and some cosmologies have been having like really different architecture of time and understanding of time. And I'm thinking also of the Yoruba philosophy in Nigeria, where going toward the future means going back to the past. And it's this kind of like philosophy of existence where the more you advance, in fact, the more you're going back toward an original time where things were decided. And it's all those, for each of us, it really takes time to really accept to make those cognitive loops where suddenly what's ahead is actually behind. And quantum physics is also on that, based on that, where past, present, and future collide. So for us, it's like really, okay, how do I understand that? And in this third, in the fifth sphere of like really those cosmologies, there is a reflection on the relation to time. I'm interested. Also, some artists are doing some really interesting experiments and I would say producing some thought experiences. I'm thinking of some collective in the US which is called Black Quantum Futurism, which are working on creating time capsules of like simulating different relations between very far in the past and very far in the future. And that I would love to do a chapter on dedicated to that aspect and the relation to time. If you can think of some collaboration, I'd be very happy to really dig in on that specific topic. And it's really one of the key aspects of her. And I think like when the diagram is start with the future is watching you, is like also, yeah, probably, we have already some people looking at us are thinking of the future nowadays, and we can prevent ourselves from being aware of that.
I think
thank you for that great question.
So sorry, I was just gonna finish off. I think that's a question of intercultural education and shifting mindsets with regards to these societal constructs that for each one of us in our own societies we take as given, that this is the way that the world is. But so many different societies have so many different ways of looking at the world, whether it's in the three-dimensional plane or the fourth dimension or in other dimensions. So I'm wondering what the need is, or there is a need. What the possibilities are for application of your model towards educational and intercultural spaces.
Well, in terms of like the heuristic device is really based on that multiple perspective. So the zoom out is more, it helps to clarify and, okay, I'm thinking at different scales. That's a quite universal understanding of like zoom in and zoom out. Okay, that's very easy to grasp and it's cross-cultural. It's based on like the human perception core ability, I would say. And then in each of the spheres, there is this polygonal approach where you can have plenty of different perspectives. And in each of the spheres, you can compare, juxtapose, like really mirror, make association of very different inputs. And that's what is important, is that in this device, there is no hierarchy. In each of the 5 dimensions scales, there is a possibility to have the input of very diverse. So in the installation, there is mostly images and creative concepts because it's an art installation and I really wanted to stick to that very visual language, but it can be also all kind of material and it's totally cross-cultural. You can use that device and those scales with that. And I think the polygonal approach, it's a very simple concept also, multi-polygonal, multifaceted. You look from one angle, you look from a certain vocabulary, you look from a certain culture, you look from the perspective of a certain stakeholder also. This polygonal concept is very easy to be, okay, you look from that angle, the other look from that other angle, and you can understand the difference, the common points, and have a sense of that diversity. So it's more also like, trying to find keys to actually engage in that diversity. So spheres and angles, it's more like scales and angles as bias also. An angle is a bias.
You have this virtualized? The installation?
No,
model.
I would love to produce one. It's more like it's very recent. The exhibition is on at the moment. It was really by designing the installation that I could stage the first panorama. And from that, I said it could become a digital device, but I really wanted to really work with the space to have this giant space to map a very broad horizon, and I would love to make it a digital device, and I'm sure it could be a very pedagogic tool. I
have all the contact for you.
Okay, let's think about it.
Talk about that.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt the conversation. I see a lot of people are starting to leave, but I wanted to tell you that after 1 hour and a half, it's amazing to still have 30 people interacting and interested in the conversation. So really meaning it's a wonderful debate you are having with us today, Raphaële, and thank you also, Javier. I see that Cecily has been interacting a lot with many very relevant comments in the conversation, in the chat. Cecily, are you able to talk, and would you like to interact with us?
Interesting question.
Thank you for the invitation, and I'm sorry I can't turn my video on. Yes, I'm very interested in consciousness, and I very much use a lot of the concepts from quantum physics in my own work. I'm not a mathematician, at all, but I am a philosopher, amongst other things. And yes, so I really am very interested in futurist thinking, and I've only just recently come to realise my own work is actually futurist thinking. So that's been a very interesting journey for me. And I'm very interested in moving beyond the gendered bias, because what has not yet been really, we haven't grappled with it, is the fact is the world that we're born into is not our own world. We're only internalizing an artificial consciousness. We're taught how to think because the people that have gone before us teach us how to think. And when we come into this world, you've only got to look at the babies, the way they look and make meaning of the world around them, but it's an old world and it's made out of old knowledge. And yes, it was fine for its time, but it's time bound. All knowledge is time bound. It's only for that time and we must use it for that time. So I'll stop there, and if anyone else would like to join in that conversation that I've just raised, I'd be happy.
Yeah, if I can answer about, yeah, like the aging of knowledge, but I think we, as human beings, we still need to have a sense of our, you know, at some point in our life when we make decisions, whether it's private or professional ones or political ones, we need to have a sense of our certainty. It's always wrong in a way, huh? But we need to have like to ground our decision and our action on the sense of certitude, which can be a full belief. It's not necessarily a demonstrated certainty, but knowledge is that. It's this ground on which we take anchor to act. And if we're not able to provide with new knowledge, then the old knowledge stays in place. And people get education at school, they grow with that knowledge, they grow and they develop themselves with that knowledge. And if there is not new knowledge that is appropriable, and that's why in my model I've been very keen on, you know, how can it be a model that is easy to grasp? That's why the scale model is like the easiest way to, and I think it's important to have a to still have in mind our deep needs of a certainty, or a sense of we can deal with the uncertainty, and it's part of mankind also. So all knowledge might be wrong, but if there is not new knowledge to replace it and have the credit for it, then we stick to the old one.
Yes, I agree. But what I wanted to probably move to is to think about there's an initial artificial intelligence, but there's a psychosocial journey that we can take that moves us beyond a gendered way of thinking. See, most people don't realise that their artificial intelligence that they've internalized is somebody else's intelligence, and that's fine. That's not a problem. But we have to be able to think transsystemically. We have to think across the systems rather than be in one system. And Western culture is a closed system at present. So, yeah, so there's different levels that we need to engage with reality and in reality. And to also acknowledge there is a greater journey that we can take to take us beyond being bound by the historical consciousness that we've internalized by being born into this world.
Javier, would you like to comment?
Well, I very much agree with Cecily, and the challenge, very concrete, that she poses. And I don't think that we can move forward into imagining new futures if we do not challenge not just every single knowledge category and every single knowledge system. And actually the challenge is very much about being able to move along and come and go, and not take for granted any category or any point of reference anymore. And the very core of science actually is very much that, is continually rather than sustaining a given conclusion, is keeping it permanently under scrutiny and being open to the next possible reformulation systematically. So I very much agree that someone was referring to the education that we need to also challenge and shift very much, and is rather than to make people, the young generation, to accommodate to an existing worldview, is actually to help them challenge and the existing and conceive alternatives. And to conclude as well, I wonder if everyone here is familiar with social ecological economics, but I found it an extremely down-to-earth and concrete integration of the possibility of building an alternative economic culture that is built upon human rights and actually natural rights at large, so that we cannot advance in conceiving a futures for the Anthropocene if we not deal in parallel with issues of climate and gender and race justice. So I think that as very much reference has been made to the aesthetic dimension that allows us to make sense and move along different dimensions, the ethical and political as well should be present.
Thank you. I think Sebastian, I saw a hand.
Yeah. Same, I saw Sebastian raise his hand, but I don't know, Sebastian, you want to express loud? Otherwise, I see a lot of comments from Jochen, and we haven't heard about you for a while. Do you want to comment with us? You want to reply to this?
Yeah, but it's quite private. I'm touched by this gender bias. I don't know exactly why. I like, for example, I have some intelligent women around me which impress me, but they say I'm not feminist. And so I'm in Germany, and I'm missing real feminine, strong women and real masculine, like James Bond things. And this, in my private life, I'm touched by this, that for me, avoiding to be men and women, I hope this is not meant by overcoming the gender bias. I hope not, because I think it's valuable to really live the sex whatever you are. And in my life, it's not so easy for me to be a man. And so, but maybe I don't understand properly what the comments were going on.
I have a response to that. So Jochen, I think it goes back to what Javier was saying with regard to human rights. You know, whether you're a man or a woman, however you choose to express yourself, wherever you fall on the spectrum of gender, whether you're fluid or not, or very specific to one side or very specific to another, or, you know, you like to play between the lines. I think it really has to do with how we assert and enable these human rights in our world, on the planet, as we interact with one another, and what we mean by human rights, because as was stated, humans are evolving. There are now fusions of humans. I mean, if you remember Stephen Hawking, he was one of the first cyborgs. And there are more now that who are using technological implants to be able to overcome disease and illness and extend their life. There's a specific researcher whose name, Peter something or other in the UK, who has done that with ALS, for example, motor neuron disease. So is he any less of a human because he's also part machine? And also the notion of cloning. If any of you have ever read David Mitchell's book, Cloud Atlas, that's a huge theme within that. It is a fiction book, but it'll become our reality at some point. You know, when we start cloning humans, are clones any less human than natural born humans? So, and I'm referring to generations, decades in the future, or on other planets, or what have you. But when we're talking about the dignity of the individual as well as the rights of the collective, how does all of that factor into it? And, you know, I think these are all big questions that we have to grapple with, whether we're men or women or anything in between.
Really great points. Anybody want to react to this?
Javier, no,
Well, in a way, this also extends to the prior question about the rights of non-humans,
Yeah.
whether animals, whether artificial intelligence, whatever, children. Every circumstance, again, is in the last end referred to a set of values that enable or not to articulate civilization. So in a way, again, the challenge for the future is not just to think the actual forms, the actual shape that alternative civilizations might take, but before that, the underlying values, aesthetical, ethical, political, epistemological, under which alternative relationships with the world, with a more than human world, can be designed and experimented. So I think that first of all, we are challenged to look at that underlying value system that would make possible to try out these new integrations.
Thank you, Javier. If I can bounce on that, and in the second sphere, in the Alien Cosmologies model, with focus on the lifestyle design and uses, in the conference I gave at the Souche Museum that was really focusing on of AI and gender. I was really also, just to be a little bit provocative on the topic, that through feminism, we have been able to analyze and understand how men have been subordinating women in the history of mankind. There have been this natural subordination that came in so many cultures. It became a kind of like natural development of societies. And now that we are questioning that subordination and recreating an equilibrium, maybe that we can learn from that feminism also in our relation to non-human in general, of like who is supposed to be the subordinate of who and at what condition and under which contract. And I think this subordination concept is really interesting to analyze, as much the gender bias and the gender relationship or the society equity, but also in the relation to human and non-humans, whether machines or natural bodies, are who is supposed to be, you know, who is supposed to be to have the hand on the drive, like and that concept of subordination, I think, is really interesting. Like nod. When does it happen? How does it happen?
But what about theater and rituals? I think it can be a phase which is fruitful in a person. I like the art so much to have these roles in opera and theater. When it's for some time, then another one comes. It could be a dynamics.
I'm not sure what the link with theater, but also like about art and future and art and thinking. A theater is a very specific frame. Like when you look at a theater performance, you know you're looking at a theater performance. The stage is set. You are a sit, you are a viewer, and you look at a performance. When you want to think in the real world, well, maybe it is like in a theater, in a fictional space, which you know is a fiction, but in the real world, there is not that frame. And so you don't analyze the situation the same way. Something you can look in a theater play or in a film, you can laugh at something extremely violent. You look at a Quentin Tarantino film and there is like splash murder and you're cracked up. So your emotion is driven because it's in a fiction, and there is a frame where you know it's a fiction. But when you analyze the same situation happening in the real world, you certainly don't react the same way. So when it's about comparing how like an artistic proposition can help you think, you have to be really aware of that fictional frame in which it is. And that's why I'm more interested in art, because artistic, like art proposition are in the real world. An art installation is in the space with you. You can pass by it. It's not as clearly separate. When you are in a museum, it is a fact. It is, you know you are in a museum, but an artwork can be located in other spaces and becomes an agent in the space where it is. And to the opposite of films or theater, theater is, you know, you clearly, you know where you are, and you are a viewer, you're not an agent. Some new performances are also making you being an agent in it. But in terms of like, you know, thinking through art or with cultural, yeah, it's cultural proposition can be a way to think and help you think and simulate thought experiences, thought experiments, but it's not the same as a real world that you apprehend differently.
It's really nice that we come back to this conversation, because it's been an ongoing thread, I think, through many of our conversations. Like, and we have within our audience, maybe not today, but in the other sessions, a split or a division among people who think that art or fiction can be a good way to think about the future and think about the ethics we can build for the futures, and others think, no, we should rely just on fact, on credible and factual and tangible elements. So I suggest we continue the conversation in one of our next conversation, because we're almost arriving at the end of the 2 hours. And I mean, it was so lively and interesting and intense and insightful, and I don't have enough adjectives to tell you how exciting it was for everybody, but the comments were so nice, so many compliments towards you, Raphaële and Javier. So I guess that's a big success. I'm really excited that we had this conversation today. I will just give a few last housekeeping comments now. Our next session is on the 26th with Ruth Lewis. I'm so sorry we missed it last month, so we're rescheduling it. I hope you can join us. We'll try to accommodate European time zone this time as well, such as today. I think it was not too late for you. Another thing I wanted to mention also, the conversation was, oh, thank you, Nicole, for sharing about the next event. Wonderful. You have also the link to register in the chat. And another thing I wanted to mention, which was inspired from everything we've been hearing today, I was wondering, Raphaële, maybe as the last comment or as the last call to action or call to creation or something, would you be interested in reaching out to this audience, the one who are still with us, or maybe you can send a collective emails to all of the ones who attended today, because I feel like you like to create around creative representation, visual representation, and you have here in the audience so many wonderful and brilliant minds. Is there anything you would like to build, I don't know, in conclusion, or maybe as a starter for a conversation here with all the people you have today? And would you like to give a final word around what you can do collectively with all the people who were there to support you today?
Well, first, I would like to say a big thank you to you, Sylvia, for this great invitation. It was like really a great occasion also to really highlight that relation between foresight, art, and philosophy. It's a rare occasion, and I'm really glad I had a chance to develop that presentation. I'm really happy Javier made that introduction, and I really look forward to continuing that conversation. And I really encourage the audience to buy and look at the Knowledge for the Anthropocene book. It's a really food for thought for all of us. So thank you to both of you. And I mean, the lab Toward Alien Cosmologies is a quite of open platform. I'm totally open to proposition. If you have, if you can think, Paola, if you want to think of a more pedagogical tool to develop from it, I'll be very happy to follow you on that. I'm really interested in also learning experience design, and I think future art, future and learning experience can be also something to deepen. So I mean, as I I'm going to share with all the audience my, it was in my slides, but I'm putting again my email address if people want to reach out and think of other episodes. I'm totally open. Time is also like a really important facet. So it's more like an open floor for proposition that I would like to make. I mean, now it's like my agenda is too busy to work on a publication now. But in the medium term, I would like to produce a kind of like manual of that alien cosmologies and methodologies. And I think there is still some deeper research to make on some aspects. So that's we didn't speak so much of ethics, but I'm kind of happy that because for me ethics is once we have a sense of possible worlds that we can have a sense of what is good and not good, and ethics is very much that about like figuring out in ultimately what are the reference in the good, and I think it's better to leave that question on the side beforehand and just take it afterward. So that also, otherwise the mind is it's bias also. Ethics is a bias also. Yeah.
I absolutely support that comment, and maybe that's a good way to conclude today, because I think the last session we actually focused more on ethics, especially the first one around machines and ethics and wars of the futures and ethics and biotech and ethics. And I think at some point we needed to zoom out more around philosophical framework and like the questions we had today around gender, around the different representation of nature. How do we integrate less linear representation in the way we think about it? And I think that's the first step before we even get into ethics. So absolutely aligned with what you were just saying, Raphaële. And we will have plenty of other occasions to focus on ethics. So I think this session today was absolutely necessary in the journey we're having through this many different conversations each month. So I want to thank you all. I want to thank our two speakers today, Raphaële, Javier. I want to thank Nicole, who's always amazing at supporting us for building this event and being there all along. So thank you so much for APF and Nicole. Thank you for all the audience. Feel free to connect with us. There will be a recording. If you want to reach out to Raphaële left her email in the chat, rbw@liid.fr. And I hope we see you in a couple of weeks for our next session. Thank you all. Thank you so much. Have a good day, evening, and so on.